Thank you so much for joining Ace Your Health podcast. My name is Ace Choksey. This is Aaron Hanley. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure. We've been talking about gardening. Gardening, why garden, what gardens are. We're taking you guys through a journey of understanding gardening and how to make it precision personalized for you. And our goal is going to be teaching you all the time pertinent information that is according to the seasons. Because if you want to learn gardening, you have to know what to do now. And we have talked about soils, we have talked about different zones and plants. Today, our topic is going to be
Seed starting the ecological way.
Ecological way.
Yes.
This is awesome. So there are many ways of starting seeds or seeding for your crop or for your fruit. But how do you do it in the most ecological way? So she's super, super smart. And so why do we need to start seeds now in the wintertime and when we can't go out, right? So it's like indoors, right?
Seems a bit counterintuitive, but and I always like to preface this presentation by saying, this isn't going to be for everybody. You certainly do not need to grow a garden in this way, right? Like we could just go out to our nurseries or even purchase plants online, and that's perfectly acceptable. For those who prefer challenge, and I would also say this is appropriate for kids, retired folks who want to, embark on a new hobby. This is great for the science geeks in the room and also for foodies. I like to start seeds indoors and early in the year, December, January, February even, because if you want to grow long season crops, things like onions, tomatoes, peppers, parsley, brassicas, things like broccoli, cauliflower, etc., you would have to start those early on. Otherwise, you're not going to get the full-formed cabbage, let's say, at the end of its season. So it's best to get a head start on some of your crops early so that you can harvest before it gets too cold again.
That's so interesting. So it makes sense to me. I've been so
Go ahead.
that's so interesting. It makes sense to me, what you're saying. But I've been used to buying, pre-planted things from the stores. But there must be benefits to seeding indoors. What would be the benefit that somebody who's looking into, because that's how we're going to convince somebody
to actually do this
yeah.
and go to all this quote unquote trouble. Well, I would say a really big reason, I would say at least 5 reasons that you would start seeds early and indoors. One of those reasons is that you can grow some pretty exotic or rare varieties that you may not find in your grocery store all the time. Like these shishito peppers. These are really popular right now. And the foodies in the group will know what I'm talking about because these are awesome grilled or, added to your stir fries and so forth. But this is something that's a little bit exotic, right? You're not going to typically find this in your store. So that would be outside of growing long season crops, which you really would just have to start them early. Your exotic and rare varieties, heirloom varieties, organic varieties, non-GMO varieties that aren't always available in the nurseries that you're buying plants from or in the grocery store. This would be a great way to get those foods into your diet, and it gives you an opportunity to see something literally go from a very small thing to to see the process of growth and development. I think is mentally healing as well as it is physically healing, because obviously you're putting your time and effort into growing these things.
Mm-hmm. So that's really interesting. Where do you purchase seeds from?
So I purchase the majority of my seeds online from reputable seed companies. There's a great link that we'll put in the PDF that goes along with this class realpharmacy.com has a list of like over 130 different companies across the United States. And I like to tell people to purchase seeds as locally as possible. That way you're more insured of getting varieties that will tend to do well in your area. So for example, the folks in the northeastern states, you might purchase your seeds from Johnny's. They're big in Maine. There's Burpee. If you are West Coast, you want to look at Botanical Interest based out of Colorado, Renee's Garden, Sustainable Seed Company, Territorial Seed Company. If you're in the South, Southern Exposure Seed is a very good company to purchase from. And if you're in the Midwest like we are, I like to buy from Baker Creek. They're based out of Missouri. Seed Savers Exchange in Iowa is awesome. Yeah, so locally, meaning region-wise. You know, if you're in the Midwest, try to purchase from companies in the Midwest. You tend to get better luck.
Wow, those are some really good resources. I'm sure they will all want either you write them down or join the community and you'll get all the PDFs. So that's great. But thank you for sharing all those resources, because that's the hardest part into starting any project, to know the right resources where you get stuff from.
That's right.
So, you know, when I go and purchase a little pod that's already ready to germinate and it's already ready, I just gotta come and plant it in my pot in the right season. It's at the store, ready to go. Now, there are not that many terminologies on there, but like when we look at all these seeds, there must be something on there, right? Like how do I know what seeds are good? What am I looking for?
Right.
What are some of the
There are some things to be aware of when you're purchasing seeds, because you don't want to end up with a plant that isn't going to do what you thought it was going to do. So there's 10, and we'll break it down.
There are 10 of them?
There's 10, I know.
All right, so some more terminology, being... all right, let's go with the first two.
Yes.
What are the first two things I would want to know?
Okay, so in the plant world, you have something called tender versus hardy plants. What does that mean? Tender plants, I'll give you an example. Think of basil.
They love you a lot?
They're very tender toward you. They're so tender that they may break. And that's literally what it means. Like if there's harsh weather, they may not withstand freezes. They may not even withstand a slight freeze like basil. On the other hand, rosemary, which has a woodier stem, your shrubs, your trees, obviously those are more hardy because they will last through the seasons and that typically will not die back unless you get a really hard winter. So that's pretty basic and simple.
That's easy to remember. Okay, I got this. All right, what's the next two?
All right.
So wait. Follow. Tender, hardy. Okay, let's see if I can get this next at the end. All right, what's the next two?
We also want to discuss disease resistance, right? So some plants, and you'll see it right on the seed packet, it will say tolerant or resistant. Tolerant varieties will tend to, they may contract a disease, right? It's possible, but it's also it's usually a mild contraction, and it may not mean that you're going to lose your entire crop. It just may mean that you might not produce as much yield. Resistant varieties, however, are really resistant toward disease, and that's how they were genetically created. That they can deter disease as scratch that.
No, I get that. They can deter disease.
Yes.
Makes sense.
So resistant varieties will actually resist the typical diseases that you might see in that plant.
That is so interesting.
Family.
So it makes me think that anything that is tolerant, it needs more care. You have to provide the right environment. You have to take care of it a little bit more because they don't know how to fight yet.
Exactly.
Or they may never know how to fight just because they're really tolerant they take in That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And resistance don't. So what are the next two? So we got 4.
All right, we should talk about open pollinated versus hybridized plants. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
So your open pollinated varieties are plants that are pollinated by birds, bees, other insects, could be ants, any number of creature, right, is responsible for pollinating or bringing food to that particular plant. And it's important as organic gardeners to know the difference, because open pollinated seeds are the type of seeds that you really want to save year in and year out. Their parents are of the same variety, so you get a true to form offspring in an open pollinated seed. Whereas hybridized seed, what they do with those plants is they're trying to create, okay, if I want a really sturdy tomato that will withstand months and months of transportation, I need to ensure that that tomato is going to have a thick skin.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be less prone to bruising. And so what plant developers will do is they will take traits from one tomato that gives them the sturdiness, and maybe traits from another tomato to give it its flavor. But in the end, you've got a plant that its seed will not be true to its parents' form, and therefore those seeds are they're kind of useless. I mean, you can try and grow from those seeds, but generally they're not worth saving or replanting.
But they will grow.
They will
if they're
absolutely
hybrid.
grow, and they usually grow very beautifully, and what you would typically find in grocery stores.
Mm-hmm.
Most of your heirloom or organic seeds are open pollinated, because these are seeds that have been passed down generation over generation, and these are the kinds of seeds that will produce wonky looking fruits. You might get a carrot with 2 legs instead of 1, and they may not be appropriate for grocery stores, but they're certainly just as good to eat, if not better. And the added benefit of being able to save those seeds and regrowing those plants the next year without even having to purchase seeds.
That's good to know. That's really good to know. But I guess you do have to watch out for GMOs. But okay, so we went over 6 of them. What's the next 2? You said 10, right?
Yes.
Okay. So
All right.
what are the next 2?
Let's talk about determinate versus indeterminate. And tomatoes are a good example of this. Determinate types of tomatoes will stop growing at a certain height. Indeterminate types, however, can flourish and grow and grow and grow, and they may even be a vining variety, in which case you're going to need some sort of support, otherwise it's going to go crazy. So if you don't have the space, for example, for an indeterminate tomato, then you may want to only grow determinate types, because you know that they're going to stop at some point.
Mm-hmm. That's a very important point, because if you planted some things that just keeps growing and growing and growing, and then it's like, what do you do with that? You want to kill it. All right, so that's 8. What's the last 2?
And the last 2 have to do with bolting and unrelated, but GMOs, as you mentioned earlier. Let's talk about bolting for a second. This refers to a plant's ability to throw up a flower stalk, and this is usually done prematurely, and it's actually considered undesirable in a lot of plants like broccoli and lettuces, because as soon as that plant goes to seed, sends up a flower to produce seed, what ends up happening, and that's kind of the plant's signal of death, really. It's on its downturn, and you can end up with leaves that are rather bitter. They just might not have as much potency. They just might not taste as good as a variety that either is slow to bolt or it just doesn't bolt at all.
Can you explain that again? Because that was a hard concept.
So if you take a broccoli plant, for example, and let's talk about why this happens. Why would a plant prematurely flower and go to seed when it should have a season, right? Well, we know, and especially in our climate here, our springs can be very erratic. We can get hot spells, we can get cold spells, we can get rainy spells. All of these things contribute to that plant's health and survival. if we were to get a really hot spell
Mm-hmm.
during the cooler dormant seasons of spring and early summer, then some of these plants are going to think, oh, okay, it's summertime, it's time for me to die down. I'm going to send up my flower and produce seed for next season. And in doing so, it renders the plant itself either bitter, as I said, or maybe it just doesn't have the same potency. It may not be as flavorful. So early bolting varieties are considered undesirable because you're not going to get the longer season out of them.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. And then you said last one was GMO.
GMOs, and of course there's a lot of debate and a lot of controversy over GMOs. GMOs stand for genetically modified organisms. And these are specific changes that have been introduced into the DNA of a particular organism. Can be proteins, it could be vitamins, it could be foreign substances or even chemicals. Any number of substances can be used for GMO crops. And because we just don't have the long-term studies on these things, most organic gardeners will steer clear of GMO type crops because we just don't know how this may be affecting our health long-term.
Okay, that's interesting. That's something to watch out for. So let's just recap. You know, we talked about GMO, we talked about bolting, then we talked about determinant and indeterminate, and we talked about tolerant and resistant. Then we talked about hardy and tender. I have to look. It's hard to remember these things. And then we talked about open pollinated and hybrid. So these are some things that you'll find on back of this or on the label somewhere
Yes.
when you're buying seeds. Okay, that's good. That's awesome. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail about, you know, we have this whole spread here and we're going to show you certain things and certain concepts in our next video. So just come back, you know, or look for part 2 of seed starting the ecological way video somewhere, and join the community for all the PDFs and a lot more videos on how to, because in the community we have shared some simple concepts, actually shown you how-to videos so that you know exactly what you're going to be doing at home as well. And yeah, this is a great start. I mean, I'm enjoying this. This is good information because it's like going out and buying a computer. You need to know all the specifications. You can't just go out and buy it if you've never bought something like that.
It's very true.
So this is cool. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. My name is Ace Choksey. This is Aaron Hadley. We'll see you guys soon.